Hi, great to be here. Thanks, NGINX and everyone in the organization for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here and to talk to you about open source, something that I'm passionate about, and I'm going to tell you all about the state of open source, especially open source in organizations. My name is Javier Perez. I'm a chief evangelist at Perforce, and I've been in open source for many years. I've been doing solution architecture, pre-sales, many years in product management, and in the last couple of years, advocacy and evangelism around open source, around most technologies, around cloud native, SaaS solutions, and more. But enough about me. Let's talk about open source, right? Let's talk about what's going on today, 2022, in open source. So, have a few numbers for you. Open source today, it's big, right? Maybe it's huge, right? You can see those numbers. More than 320 million repositories on GitHub, more than 73 million developers, and these are actually recent numbers. Projects that are more popular, that are used by many organizations, that are sponsored and with contributions from many companies, normally go to open source foundations like the Linux Foundation and all the affiliate foundations like Continuous Delivery Foundation, Cloud Native Foundation, Open Source Security Foundation now, and a few more. Obviously, the Apache Foundation with many successful projects out there, and Eclipse Foundation, which is probably those are the top three. They are the top three foundations in terms of the number of projects that they sponsor. So we're looking at big numbers, right? We're looking at really big numbers around what's going on today in open source. So before I go into more details and some of the findings on a very interesting open source survey that we did, a global survey that we did, I have three examples, three good, cool examples for you, so you can see the reach of software, especially open source software. So let's start with out of this planet. Some of you probably saw the Mars helicopter Ingenuity. All the software that runs this helicopter in Mars, it's open sourced. Actually, NASA open sourced it in 2017, and they have a ton of contributions. They started in C++. Typically, embedded systems are done on C or C++, but then all these other components were added on Python. In fact, GitHub, when this was launched a couple of years ago, recognized more than 12,000 libraries that were part of the software that was in the functionality of Ingenuity. And they actually did a cool thing for all the contributors that contributed to projects that were used in this helicopter. They were recognized with a badge like this. And it was really, really cool. I worked with a few of the contributors, and they were really happy to have their badge there. And in some ways, contribute to this big project, which, by the way, is going to continue. They are repurposing the software for other missions, including one that was just announced to go to Venus in 2029 and 2030, and some others, right? And the nice thing is you're flying, so places where the rover can just go, you can go with this type of devices. So really, really cool, all based on open source. I have another example for you. The Mayflower autonomous ship. Not a lot of people know about this. They are autonomous self-driving cars now. Some people talk about the autonomous or self-driving trucks, but they're also ships. And it was an interesting project. It's obviously all based on artificial intelligence software. They have something around 30 cameras and sensors and 2 weather stations. With artificial intelligence, which of course is all based in open source, they use many of the Python libraries. They used obviously TensorFlow instead of PyTorch. They use TensorFlow. The use of all these technologies was to be able to navigate right without a crew, and be able to recognize risks from other ships to seagulls and of course icebergs, right? So they did this trip, and actually just ended just a couple of weeks ago, and from Plymouth, UK, United Kingdom, to Plymouth, Massachusetts, right? And that's why the name of the Mayflower, right? They were trying to recreate what happened 402 years ago, 1620. They had some electrical and physical issues, not software. So they had to stop on you can see on the map there on the Azores Islands first, and then they stopped with another kind of battery-related issue into Halifax, and then from there they went to Plymouth. And here's a picture of a replica of the original Mayflower next to the autonomous ship. So, and of course, this is another one, right? You know, Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, it's all about software, right? It's all about blockchain. Blockchain has been predominantly open source. Hyperledger, which is a Linux Foundation project, it's all open source. The market cap is over $1 trillion, right? So, you know, you can make your own conclusions about this market, but it's significant. And there are hundreds, probably thousands of APIs available, all based on free standards. Could be REST APIs, could be GraphQL, based on open source standards. And that's what is driving the technologies today. So let me show you some of the statistics, some of the things that we found on this State of Open Source project. Our State of Open Source report, survey first, and then the project. I just talked about the growth briefly. Not going to talk about open source security, which I know is top of mind. I know in this conference, you are going to hear about the good products that NGINX offers around helping you with security. But I want to focus on the open source in organizations, which is what we did with this major survey. More than 2,600 people all over the world, small, medium, large organizations across 20 of the major industries, right? So very complete survey. And the very first question we asked was, has your organization increased the use of open source software over the last year? So we're talking about 2021. And it was a rounded yes, right? Basically 76.5, if we round it up, 77% of the respondents said, yes, we increased the use of open source in our organizations. Actually, 36% said significantly, whatever the meaning of significantly is for every person. And the number that caught my attention really was that 1.6% of we reduced the use of open source. And as we looked into the raw data, it turned out to be related to some open source that went end of life, specifically around CentOS. I'll talk about that in just a second, but that doesn't mean that they stop using open source. They just stop using some of the open source software, right? So, you know, I think this is very clear, right? We see so many businesses, so many organizations really building their business, their strategy around open source. And there's so many, right? I mean, I listed their NGINX, but these are just a small sample. You'll recognize many of these logos. And they are very popular. There are businesses around this, and there are organizations contributing back to these projects. So when we ask, you know, what are the reasons to use open source software in your organization, the overall number one was access to innovation. And if you think about it, this is a little bit different. It used to be because it's free, right? Cost reduction. No, now the use of open source is because you can access the latest innovations there, right? The beauty of the numbers, right? More people contributing, you get more innovation, you get a better software. Number two, actually, in North America, and this chart represents North America, was modernization, right? Modernizing their technology stacks, which, you know, is similar to innovation. And of course reduce or improve the development velocity. When you go and look at other regions, actually in the UK and Europe, number one is still cost reduction, with a close number two, access to innovation. So what are when we went and ask on each one of the specific technologies, we asked the same question about, you know, why you selected those technologies. Look at this tree. These three were like the top three selections for access to or wanted to use that open source technology. Number one is, you know, security, availability of patches, releases, right? So an open source project that is active, that continually have releases and fixes. Stability and robustness, of course, right? In your organization, you want software that is battle tested, right? That is robust, that you can trust. And number three, which is interesting, is the level of proficiency and experience in their own personnel, right? So most likely, if you have experts in your organization with a specific knowledge of open source database or let's say Kubernetes, most likely you are going to use that software. Now, when we compare that, when we ask specifically about the support challenges on open source, you can see the relation there. One support challenge is to keeping up with so many updates and patches, right? There are so many versions that go end of life. Follow up on the release lifecycle of those projects. That takes time, right? And we're talking about not one or two, but we could potentially be talking about thousands of open source libraries that you have to keep an eye on that, right? So that's a support challenge. Number two is, like most software, as you scale up, as you upgrade, well, you need help with installations, with upgrades, with configurations, especially around the newer technologies, right? Cloud native, container-based technologies. And then the third support challenge is related to the reason to use open source was, I have people with that that expertise or those skills. Well, the support challenge is also acquiring that personal experience and proficiency, right? It's a great time if you're an engineer listening. It's a great time to be an engineer, to be a developer, because you can learn about all these open source technologies, and there are opportunities for you. So here are a few numbers, just really quick. When we ask the use of open source in organizations, as I said, globally across all industries, you can see the numbers there. First, on Linux distributions, open source distributions. Not everything here is fully open source. You could recognize a couple of them that are commercial versions of open source. But interesting that Ubuntu is the most popular, the most used. CentOS went end of life. There's something called CentOS Stream now, which is a little bit different. That's a topic for another chat, but has declined, actually even below or less than Debian. And the other highlight here is that as a result of the end of life of CentOS, there are other Linux distributions that came up in the last less than 2 years, in the last year. Distributions like Rocky Linux, Alma Linux, and Navy Linux. Now, when we ask about containers or cloud native technologies, you will be surprised with the numbers here, right? So people might think, well, only 25% are using Docker. Well, that's because it's a split. We're also including Podman there. Remember that it's a global survey. It's not just for specific technologies or specific industries. We see OpenStack still there, very much at the same, equal to Kubernetes, and that depends on the industry. Industries like telecom, they're still heavily used on OpenStack. And there's a big opportunity to grow this, right? Istio, I know we with NGINX, there's functionality around Istio, and it's growing, right? It's definitely growing. How about CI/CD, right? GitHub Actions is actually not open source, but it's free, and many open source projects are using GitHub Actions, so we have to have it there on the list of options. And the highlight here, if you pay attention to the different open source CI/CD tools there, is that this trend to move into cloud native, into container-based or Kubernetes environments for these tools. And examples of that are NGINX, which actually just passed Jenkins in terms of usage, according to our respondents. Spinnaker, Tecton, that are based on cloud native, container-based Kubernetes environments for these CI/CD tools. 9% not using CI/CD tools. That some of you might think, well, that's a bit high. When we break down for example, large and medium organizations, that's not 9%. That's actually about 5-6%. And now the next one, configuration tools, right? If you're in the cloud, if you're using virtualized cloud environments, you typically want to have configuration tools. The leaders continue to be open source tools, of course, Puppet, Ansible, and Chef. And of course, there's a commercial version of all three, or Unsalt, and more, right? For me, the highlight here is that don't use only 16%. And again, if you looked at larger organizations in the report, it's actually much lower than that. So very much into DevOps, right? CI/CD tooling, configuration tooling, automating, and that's a trend that I'm sure you would agree. Data technologies. You want to take a guess before I show you? Would that be MongoDB or some of the other open source technologies? By the way, I call it data technologies because it's not just databases, right? Nowadays, right? It's streaming. It's data for optimized for analytics. It could be logging. So just data technologies, and you can see the numbers there. MySQL, Postgres, MongoDB, the top three. But there are many options, and for me, the highlight here is that there are many options around these technologies. So when we ask respondents about what is your desired technologies, what you are not doing today and you would like to do, well, everyone wants everything. Everything you see there, things like data science and AI, machine learning, or even doing blockchain and cryptocurrencies. But the number one was Kubernetes and Kubernetes operators. If you're not familiar with Kubernetes operators, it's also other open source software that is now native into Kubernetes deployments. I know NGINX also provides some good solutions around those Kubernetes environments. That's what people want to do, right? That was the number one selected as the most desired technology. And by the way, you read the circles there. We even have where things like quantum computing was mentioned multiple times, right? Quantum computing, by the way, the software it's been open source. There are now frameworks to take advantage of using quantum computing. Companies like IBM and Google are very much into that and offering as a kind of a cloud-based. So another interesting area to go and solve so many other problems, thanks to kind of like the functionality, the speed of processing that you can achieve with quantum computing. Finally, we ask about the maturity in the use of open source. And you can read through the chart, things like, well, we open source what we do. We worked on public repos. But for me, the most interesting areas here, and by the way, all these numbers have been growing over the years, right? The most important factors for me, well, I would like to highlight two. One is the use of open source program offices, or OSPOs. If you don't have one in your organization, take a look at it. Just like you have like the security office, organizations have now an open source program office, and help with the strategy, help with kind of unifying what you're doing, help with defining the strategy of what you're going to contribute, what you're going to consume, look at things around open source licenses. So very interesting to see. You see only about 15% of organizations having an OSPO, but depending on the industry, banking, insurance, financial services, they are at 19%. The other aspect I would recommend is to pay attention to inner source. Inner source is basically the best practices, the use of the way you do open source, but behind closed doors within your organization. So in your organization, you might have different groups, maybe even different divisions or companies that got acquired. Why not doing inner source, kind of open source within your own groups? And then when you're ready, you can open source that project, or just for best practices, right? I'm sure you'll relate with, there are really good engineers or maybe good skills that can contribute together that work on different areas of your organization. So that's another trend. We see that organizations that are more mature in this space, they're focusing on OSPOs and inner source. So to end my talk, just want to say that really open source, I think I provided enough evidence, open source in organizations is here to stay. I think we should focus on continue the innovation, continue to focus on those support challenges, especially around the skills and the skill gap, or get help to help you with that. And of course, contribute back to open source. So with that, thank you very much. Appreciate